Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Live on the Orthodox Christian Network. My name is Noelle. I am our moderator and behind-the-scenes producer, and Let's Talk Live is hosted by Father Chris Metropulos. 65% of Americans report viewing some kind of worship or other spiritual content online, which is why in 2021 we offered over 280 programs through MyOCN Community and our online partnerships, reaching over 51,000 people. The Orthodox Christian Network is a 501c3 corporation and a 100% donor-supported ministry. We rely on donors like you to keep these programs free and available, so if you're able, please consider making a contribution today. And as always, please support us through your prayers and by sharing this content with your friends and family. With that, let's get into today's interview.
We welcome our very special guest today, Alexei Krindatch, who's going to give us some incredible information about a survey that he's done. He's done many of them, but this one will really, I think, hit home. Let's begin with prayer. As you know, I've always light my votive candle before we start. We'll say the prayer, and then I'll introduce Alexei, and then we'll get right into the questions. Heavenly King and Comforter, the Spirit of Truth, everywhere present, filling all things, the treasure of blessings, the giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of every stain and save our souls, O gracious one. Amen. Today we discuss the first results and findings from an ongoing national study. It's called The New Traditional in a Most Traditional Church, How the Pandemic Has Reshaped American Orthodox Christian Churches. The core question for this research project is, how has the pandemic transformed the Orthodox Church, the original Christian church that never changes? The study examines both the overall impact of the pandemic on our church life, and most importantly, what long-term consequences it may have for American Orthodox Christian parishes. It does many things, and I don't want to get into all of them because I'm going to let Alexei speak about that. Let me tell you a little bit about our special guest today. He's not new to us, first of all. He's been in other programs before. He's the national coordinator for the second census of U.S. Orthodox Christian Churches /2020 U.S. Religion Census. He has authored 3 books. He served as the research coordinator for the Assembly of Canonical Bishops in the United States of America from 2011 to 2019. His many reports and articles on various aspects of the Orthodox life in America. He is a native of Russia. Alexei lives in Berkeley, California. Alexei, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Father Chris. Always pleasure to come back, almost like coming back home.
Good for you, good for you. Can you tell us a little bit about, it's really a complex national study. How did it come into existence? Who were his sponsors? Are any other researchers involved with you?
Right. So our Orthodox study, which looks at consequences of pandemic for Orthodox church life in America, is not done as a standalone study. It is done in cooperation with much larger national study, which is called Exploring Pandemic Impact on Congregations, or EPIC. Okay. And this study includes dozens of partners who represent different Christian churches. And the whole huge project, EPIC, is sponsored by General's multi-million grant from Lilly Foundation. My particular small piece in this huge mosaic is sponsored also by General's grant from the Louisville Institute, which is also arm of Lilly Foundation. So I'm doing my research, but a lot of questions which we are asking clergy and laity are the same which are asked by my partners. So our data are comparable, and we can look at each other and compare how pandemic affected Orthodox Church versus Episcopalian, non-denominational, etc., etc. So it is my project, but in cooperation with dozens other Christian sociologists of religions and Christian groups.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what.
All right. Well, that's important, because people will say, well, this is just in a silo of its own. But no, you are saying you have many churches that have been involved, because obviously the pandemic did not discriminate where it would hit. It hit everyone.
Exactly. And it's always also helpful to see, well, what happens to us, but as compared to other folks, can we learn something from them, or can they learn something from us?
Well, one result that sort of jumped out at me during the past 2 years, most parishes, it seems, declined in membership. A typical parish shrank, they say, by 15%. Some people said even 45%. Even more dramatic was the decrease in the number of people who actually attended liturgical services once the churches had reopened. The average in-person worship attendance, they say, we lost about 22% of its pre-pandemic people in the pews. Question to you is, do you see any hopeful signs, any indication in your research that the people will actually become active again after the pandemic? Will they come back, I guess, is the question.
Well, when I looked at all data from clergy survey, it looks like we have two messages. As always, good news, bad news. And by the way, pretty much the same is discovered by my colleagues from other Christian groups. So in this regard, we are not unique. The bad news is that those who become inactive, who dropped out of regular church life during pandemic, are unlikely to come back. That's bad news. The good news is that study data tell us, and also interview with many clergy, that those people dropped out of church life who were already marginally involved before pandemic. So they would come once in a while to the church, but during pandemic they didn't at all, and now no point. However, on the other side, what happened during pandemic, the core group of parishioners who were already regular attendants and participants have become even more dedicated. Now they go to the church more frequently than before pandemic because they appreciate it more. They give more money. They volunteer more frequently. So in other words, our churches have become smaller, but more faith-oriented. And those clergy who got this new reality, they benefit greatly because they are really not searching for their old dead souls or nostalgic for them, but they're working with their core parishioners who are much, much more enthusiastic about their faith and church life than before pandemic. Plus, there was another interesting trend. Many parishes reported that they have unusually high influx of catechumens. So what happened during pandemic, a lot of people went on a sort of like a spiritual quest. And a lot of them discovered Orthodox parishes. They also discovered other churches. But again, many clergy reported that they have like dozens of catechumens, and they used to have a few during the years, and now they baptize 15 in one sitting. So you have two good news. Number one, your core parishioners have become even more dedicated and focused on church life. And then, if you haven't missed train during pandemic, and you were able to grab those people who were sort of soul searching, spiritual searching, you got even more fresh blood.
Those are very good points. Very good point.
So you have both trends.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm saying you have, like I said, you have bad news. Old members are not coming back, but your old folks who were dedicated are even more dedicated, and you got fresh blood from catechumens. That's
okay.
it.
And do we know, I don't know if any study's ever been done, why the so-called marginal left? Mm-hmm. Anything like that?
Well, explanation is fairly simple. You know, those people would come to the church once in a while out of habit. All right, church was shut down for half a year or for 1 year. And then this habit really evaporated. It was already not that important to them, right? And then you break, this participation, and then some of them are old folks and, dangerous. In other words, you just triggered it a little bit. Someone is a little bit interested, but then you break even this small interest, and then you just cannot drag them back. It's just natural. It's human nature, I wanted to give you a quote. I found one of the clergymen. We allowed clergy, to write some comments. Just one sentence, and this is sort of sentence which would describe situation in many parishes. Here's quotation. Experience of the past couple of years increased the level of dedication among those who were already most active in the church. Those who were nominally involved have stopped attending. Not that there is anything to celebrate with people not returning, but those who stayed have increased their talent and dedication profoundly. Wow. That's just quotation from one of the clergy, and this is pretty much what we were getting across the board. Yeah.
It's very important. It's not, the issues now with the church for some people have been, let's put a bulletin board up and let's see what we can throw at the board and see if it sticks. That's a dangerous way. What you're doing is very important. You're actually looking at the real cause, the real numbers of what's happening. And for me, that's very, very important. And I'm sure anyone in America would know that, and maybe throughout the world, that if you don't study where you are, you're never going to know where you're going to be. So it's very important. I mean, during the pandemic, churches were closed. Many churches began the so-called live streaming services. So people would go online because they couldn't come to church. And now you have sort of both going on. The report indicates that even today, when the churches are open again, in-person attendance, nearly 2/3 of the parish, I think it says here, yeah, they're still worshiping online. What does the study tell us about the possible future of online Orthodox services and really other aspects of life?
Right. This was actually one of the principal goals of the study, to see how this online version of Orthodox Church, put it that way, is compatible with our liturgy. And again, other Christian groups also looked at it, but my assumption was we might be different because really liturgy is a communal experience. Right. That was assumption, but we needed to test this assumption. And so I will give you a few data, and then I will let our listeners to digest those data and to make conclusions. And we are not at the end of the study yet. First of all, as you quite correctly pointed out, we still have 63% of parishes live streaming their services. Now, they worship in person, but in addition to worshiping in person, they also offer online experience. So theoretically, people can join them online if they don't go to the church. But here are two pieces of information. Number one, we asked clergy simply general questions regarding Father of, do you offer online worship? You don't. We just wanted to hear your general opinion about worship services, online worship services. Are they good, bad? And we gave them 4 options to respond. Bottom line is, without going to all those nuances, the clergy were pretty much 50-50 divided between those who are in favor of online services. And they argued that those who were in favor, they argued that it allows more easily to attend for a greater number of parishioners. For certain categories of parishioners who are, say, physically a little bit challenged, it makes for them much more easier to come to the virtual church. And also they argued, I have a bunch of people who attend from far away. In other words, he is sort of, or she is part of my parish, but he or she lives somewhere else, not in geographic proximity of the parishes. But the other half of the clergy were strongly opposing online services, arguing that they undermine the very nature of liturgical experience in Orthodox Church, or saying, well, okay, I would agree that he or she would attend online, but only under absolutely extraordinary circumstances, gravely ill, church is shut down, right? And what was interesting, those 50-50 were almost regardless of whether churches actually offer online worship. But point is, clergy are divided 50-50. But then here is another much more important piece of information. We also looked at relationships between whether a church offers online services or doesn't, and what happened with people's participation in different aspects of church life, attending services during weekday, Sunday, participating in small groups and ministries, attending religious education classes for adults, catechumen classes, children religious education, etc., etc. What we found was that potentially switching to online mode might be beneficial and effective for 2 particular ministries: religious education for adults, Bible classes, Wednesday. People wanted to participate, but there is no time to drive to the church. It's working day, etc., etc. That's one area. And second, work with catechumens. Again, in addition to face-to-face meetings, we are not saying catechumens should not meet with the priest, but, more classes, more opportunities to talk, to participate, sometimes priest face-to-face, via Zoom, whatever. Now, but for all other areas of church life, for us, for Orthodox, I'm not saying the same for Episcopalians, but for us, for Orthodox, online versions are really, really bad and have very negative influence, especially on participation in worship services, and absolutely catastrophic for religious education of children. So switching Sunday school, or whatever you call it, if it is other,
Church school, Sunday school, yeah,
is killer for religious education of young people. Young people should be in face-to-face classes.
Okay.
They should interact with one another. This is what study found. So again, we have 50% of clergy who think positively or negatively about online services. But the real data tell us, generally speaking, online format is good for religious education of adults, work with catechumens, but in every other aspect, you should be very, very, cautious using online version, because they're not good for us.
All right. No. Years ago, before the internet really exploded as it is now, I mean, at OCN, we've seen this exponential growth of people watching and interacting with us. The MyOCN community has grown over the past 2 years incredibly. But I want to tell you a little brief story that I think will relate to what you're saying, and then ask you a question. Years ago, I had a parishioner who was at our parish, and he came to me, he said, "Father, you're not going to see me for 6 months." I said, "Where are you going? Where are you going?" He says, "Well, I have my yellow pad here and my pen." He was an executive. He was a brilliant man. He had started companies, extremely wealthy gentleman. And he said, I'm not coming back here for 6 months." I said, "Where are you going to go?" He said, "I'm going to go to the local parishes, and I have a scorecard here. Did they welcome me when I walked into the church? How was the choir? How was the chanter? Are the people friendly? How was the priest? How was the sermon?" I said, "Well, that's really, very difficult." He said, "No, it's not difficult. I want to see through the lens of people who walk into the church for the first time." Now, go to today. Today's lens was the live streaming. All of a sudden, people actually saw what goes on. They got to watch, to listen, to learn. And some of what they saw, I have to tell you, Alexei, was not good. Some of what they saw was not good. The sermons were not up to par. The choir needed work. The chanter needed work. The environment was not inviting. So what the pandemic did was allow us to look through a lens that we'd never seen before at what actually goes on. Now, for some, the parishes excelled. But for others, they have an opportunity now. The pandemic, I see, as an opportunity to fine-tune the way in which we deliver the faith once and for all given to the apostles to the faithful. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, actually, I like very much your example with this fellow who took his path and, so to speak, went around. What I really liked, I got a comment from one of the clergy, but on these online services, who basically was very critical about online services for his parishioners. But he said, I do believe that for the foreseeable future, offering those online services would be almost our original way of welcoming potential guests. In other words, instead of someone moves to an area, and instead of going to all parishes, he or she, first of all, checks it online and see how community works, how good is preaching, what is quality of, I don't know, choir or chanting, or how general church looks like. So this priest emphasized, I don't like my people to attend online, but I like to keep them online because for us, it is almost like a business card, or so to speak, prospect of our parish. And so that's pretty much my answer to, your question.
It's an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity.
It's the opportunity to first meet someone who's potentially part of your parish. That's what I'm saying.
And I had heard the other thing too. I remember when we began OCN, I think I've told this story before. One gentleman accused me, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "You're going to put an antenna on the dome." I said, "No, I'm not going to put an antenna on the dome. I'm going to use the antenna down the road at the radio station. And that's going to broadcast to people." Why? Because that is the method through which people are consuming their information. And today it's an enhancement to the faith. Now it could go the other way if we're not careful in the way in which we deliver. That's why I bring up the issue of weighing. Let me ask you this question. Can you tell us, was there a single area of church life that was most negatively affected by the pandemic through your study?
Yeah, answer is very simple and very sad.
Hmm.
And the single most affected area of church life, negatively affected, with big consequences, and we have to deal with this somehow, is faith formation of young people, religious education for children and teenagers. Just two figures to show you how strong was a blow, so to speak, negative blow. About 20% of all our parishes have shut down the religious education classes for children and teenagers during pandemic and have not resumed them yet.
Wow.
Neither online nor in person. In other words, there used to be religious education for children and teenagers in parishes. There is none. All right. If you look at those who did resume or never interrupted, because there were parishes which never interrupted, one way or other, but still your typical average median parish in America is currently missing in their religious education classes a quarter of their pre-pandemic students. So you have 1/5 of parishes with totally gone religious education, and in another one, in remaining, you have a quarter of students gone. Now, it has also consequences for church attendance, because I'm not breaking a big secret, but reality is that we did have, and we still do have, many families, young families, where parents actually partially or mostly are coming to worship services because their children go to Sunday school.
That's right.
So children not go to Sunday school, bad for them, but then parents are not going to the church as a consequence, right? And if you ask me why it happened, we just talked about it, because a lot of parishes were forced during pandemic to switch their classes online. And they are very damaging for children and teenagers. They are not working for them. And then some priests, again, I'm not saying how many of them, but point is they discovered, or teachers have discovered, it is more convenient, or even parents discovered it is more convenient. And some parishes still are keeping their religious education classes for children and teenagers online. And I'm trying to deliver a message, it's bad. It may work for adults, but fathers or religious educators, if you keep your religious education classes for children and teenagers online, it will result in decreasing participation.
Okay. Well,
and also what we found as a confirmation, here is a little bit of good news.
okay.
We found that in 14%, 1 out of 7 parishes, during pandemic, we had opposite trend when we have spark increased by more than 20% of students participating, right? So just 14% we really have this growth in participation of children and teenagers. And we looked at them, and the basic explanation was very consistent. The parish has never ever shut down their in-person classes for children and teenagers, and it was possible in certain parishes. But second, most importantly, they emphasize, those parishes, regular participation of children and teenagers in worship services. In other words, don't just send them to Sunday school, let them be part of worship service until very end, and then Sunday school, because they connect their church experience with what they learn in the classes.
Yes.
So 2 very simple secrets. Don't switch religious education for children and teenagers online. Don't do this. Second, let them be part of your worship services from the very beginning until the very end, and then send them to a religious education class.
Good, very, very good points. For me, there was also a fascinating find that despite the general decline in American Orthodox churches during the pandemic, 1 in 8, I believe, the US parish, that's like 12%, reported strong growth in overall vitality. Can you speak to us about that strong growth? What were they?
Yeah, we asked this general question, how do you feel about strength of your parish? It has become much weaker, somewhat weaker, stayed the same, somewhat stronger, much more stronger. So about 12% of parishes say we are much more stronger, but what does it mean, right? We looked at those parishes. So what happened to them? And then I'll tell you what was special about those parishes.
Okay.
Growth in vitality manifested in several areas. Number one, they got much more members during pandemic. They just had huge number of people who joined these parishes. Number two, their pre-pandemic members have become much more engaged, which manifested itself, first of all, in more frequent worship attendance. Number three, they increased significantly, disproportionately high to getting new members, but even more so, people started to participate in their religious education classes. So they grew up in numbers, but even more so, they grew in number of people who participate in religious education.
Mhm.
They managed to at least keep stable the number of children participating in religious education classes. You know, everyone dropped. So if you at least keep your students at the same level, it's already a good idea, right? They increased significantly their financial stability. In other words, they say, okay, pre-pandemic our finances were okay, but now they're excellent. Or they used to be bad, now they're okay. And number five, those parishes have discovered many new ways of becoming much more involved in their local communities beyond parish. Those are all signs of growth and vitality. But then we looked at them. What was special about those 12? Why exactly those 12% of the parishes experience those interesting things? Growth in members, growth in dedication, better finances, new outreach ministries, etc., etc. And we found 4 major distinct features of these parishes. And I'm not saying that each parish could be like that, but at least adapting some of those features, could be helpful.
Yeah.
Number one, most of those parishes were what we call intentionally Orthodox. In other words, when priests and core group of activists in a parish would really emphasize for everyone importance of regular church attendance, fasting, learning about one's faith. So they were a little bit more intentionally Orthodox, all right? Mm-hmm. Just in follow basic Orthodox church rules, those very basic things, but those parishes really were constantly telling their members, you should do this, that. Number two, during pandemic, they placed great attention on keeping things as unchanged as possible. In other words, if there is any opportunity to keep worship services in person, keep them. Don't change the way how Holy Communion is served, etc., etc. Again, in certain circumstances, it was impossible, but they did whatever could be done to keep parish life running through pandemic as unchanged as possible. We cannot meet in church. Okay, we can meet in person outside of the church, something like this along this line. But then, in addition to that, also, when we looked also how decisions are made in the parish, and those churches which experience this spike in vitality were parishes where decisions were made collectively, not by the priest, not by the parish council, but where many things were discussed with the whole parish communities, right? They would gather either via Zoom, etc., and decide collectively. And also, but this probably goes without saying, those are parishes where clergy personally have very negative attitudes towards online services. And so they were very reluctant to introduce them during pandemic, if absolutely necessary, okay. But once the church was reopened, they just shut down them completely. So that's your price for becoming a vital parish. Stay offline, make people follow basic Orthodox church rules, but when decision needs to be made, talk with everyone and make decision collectively. So those are those 12% of those vital parishes, and the study is not completed yet, so we will take a further look what will happen with those 12%.
Okay.
Which became much more vital during pandemic. We will see what will happen to them in a year or in a two.
All right. Your study also gathered data on the number of deaths in each parish that were caused by COVID-19.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about those statistics? How many, how strongly were our churches affected by the death of these blessed people?
Yeah. So we asked clergy to report us number of people who died because of COVID-related things. And then we also had data on parish entire population pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So bottom line is that our mortality rate in our parishes are 3 times higher than national average. Now,
No.
I know it sounds shocking. Now, take into account, of course, that our church population is older, right? So we are not reflective of general population. It's still a big gap, but I would like to see also at the data from my colleagues from other Christian groups. I do know that our parishes were more affected than other Christian congregations because of one fact. One of the questions which was asked in my survey, but also in the survey which is done simultaneously by EPIC project exploring pandemic impact of congregations, a pastor was asked, had at least one of your parishioners or congregants died, at least one. So 38% of Orthodox parishes reported to me that we have at least one COVID-related death, at least one, versus 28% in other Christian Orthodox congregations. Here, however, is another interesting piece of data, and I'm still trying to wrap my head how it works. So bad news is it looks like we have higher mortality rates. How hard remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
But then I looked at mortality rates in the parishes which stayed open through pandemic and those which were closed. No difference. I looked at location of parishes. I have thought maybe those parishes stayed open because they were in safer area, right? Lower rates of COVID, safer worship in person, no problem with COVID. No difference.
No difference, huh?
So again, mortality rates were not different between open parishes and closed parishes, regardless of their location. And also, you know, Holy Communion for a while was a big deal.
Yeah.
And so we looked at the parishes which continued to serve Holy Communion in traditional way, which means one chalice, one spoon, no sterilization of spoons, and parishes which changed the way how Holy Communion is served. Again, no difference in mortality rates.
Mm-hmm.
So there is still more data to look at. Like I said, it
Hold
looks
on,
like we have higher. Yeah.
I want to interrupt you. So you're saying that there was no difference in mortality rate between those who use the one spoon, one chalice, and the multiple spoons?
Yeah. In fact, believe it or not, there was slightly higher mortality rates in those parishes which introduced changes, which started to sterilize, but the difference was not, statistically, it was not really significant. Okay. So point is, either parish was closed or shut down. Either it was old-fashioned way or traditional way of serving Holy Communion, or they introduced some changes in order to slow down the spread of pandemic. Mm-hmm. It did not have any influence on mortality rates. Statistically, they are the same.
Okay.
That's one of those interesting pieces which you still really have to go deeper.
Well, it is something, and I know that during this time, there were some unhappy situations that developed. Parishes had some internal conflicts, that disagreements because of the new rules, regulations. Do you wear a mask? Don't you wear a mask? Do you separate? Do you have, as you mentioned, the communion, the different ways of receiving communion? So my question is, how did the parishes handle the needs and the wishes of the local independent decision-making, giving the requirement to sort of wait and receive directives from above, from the hierarchy?
Right. Yeah, that was other big assumption in this study. We have situations, unlike Catholic dioceses, a lot of our bishops, they have their huge multi-state dioceses, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, rules, as you remember, during COVID were different even on county level. That's right? And situation in each parish was different. You have parish which is full of young people, young converts, and aging people who are 65 plus. In other parishes, it's entirely different local context. But because of our hierarchical structure, theoretically or practically for that matter, all parishes needed to wait for a directive of a bishop, which comes from somewhere and which would be in many cases uniform for his multi-state diocese with very different parishes. So you had a lot of tensions based on this, because in times like that, a universal directive is not always a good thing. Mm-hmm. So here is good news and bad news. Now we are over this pandemic, but it's sort of learning experience, and so we have to digest. Bottom line is that during pandemic, at least quarter of the parishes, every fourth parish, experienced either moderate or significant conflict with their ruling hierarchy, because they didn't like what bishop told them. A quarter of the parishes. That's sort of bad news. The good news is we also ask question a parish if pandemic was a learning experience for them to make decisions quickly, independently, locally, depending on the local context. And 1/3 of the parishes reported to us, yes, it was great learning experience. Now we learn how to make decisions efficiently, locally, depending on local circumstances. And the really good news is that there were no correlations between those two figures. In other words, it does not mean that those parishes who learn how to make decisions locally and independently were exactly the same parishes which have conflict with the bishops, and vice versa. So those two data were not related to one another. In other words, there were plenty of parishes who learned how to make decisions locally and independently, yet without going into conflict with their ruling hierarchy. So good news again was that pandemic was quite a bit of experience to decide locally,
Okay. Well, one final question, Alexei. I mean, this report is incredible. It's the beginning of the study. So finally, I'll ask you, what are the next steps? What are your goals from here?
Well, the next step actually is already evolving as we speak. We are right now in the second stage of the study, which is a study of opinions of lay people. Our first step was based on the National Survey of Orthodox Clergy. Mm-hmm. But now we talk to lay people and we are listening what were their experiences during pandemic, personal spiritual experiences, but also their reflections on what happened to their parishes during pandemic and how their parishes recover their life now post-pandemic. So we are in the middle of the huge survey, and a lot of clergy are helping us with the survey in their parishes, and we are getting data from many sources, from many channels. But if someone is listening to us today, I would like, if you are a clergyman, I would encourage you to communicate with me via contact form on our website, orthodoxreality.org. And if you are willing to do a survey in your parish, I would be very grateful. And procedure is very simple. If you are a lay person, you can go to website orthodoxreality.org, look at the page Coronavirus and American Orthodox Parishes, and there is a link to survey. You go to this survey and you share with us your experiences. And I hope to be done with latest survey within 2-3 weeks. And maybe mid-May, we will see what lay people tell us about their experiences during pandemic now, and what are their hopes for their parishes in the foreseeable future.
Alexei, thank you very much for being with us today. It's an honor to learn these different things, and it's always good to sort of peel back the pages and look at what's going on inside. Thank you so much, Alexei.
Thank you, Father Chris.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find all of our upcoming events at myocn.net, in addition to daily articles, live worship links, and other resources. We hope you'll join us again, and until then, thank you.